Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today we're going to talk about consensus and free expression, which is what we're talking about a whole lot here, because my research since COVID has really been pushed from emotional expressions, like in this new book with Tim Barber called Express the Human, which is about the foundations of emotions, emotional expressions, and how society moves toward the truth. And we're focusing on these kinds of things at the higher societal level. So one of the things that we constantly hear is that, oh, well, the consensus for, let's say global climate change, or the consensus for biological sex, or the consensus for COVID, or the consensus for the interventions, or for the vaccines. And so once they tell you that's the consensus, then often the next step is, so what you're saying is against the consensus, and so should be censored. Right? And so should be censored on the basis of consensus. Now, I'm not going to argue that consensus is a bad thing. The whole point of reputation networks, when free expression is up and running, and you have the natural kinds of circulation in the system and arguments and discussion, and it's unfettered, then over time consensus can eventually happen and maintain stability and so forth. But there's a very simple and obvious reason for why you don't want it to be the case that if there's consensus, or the more that there's consensus, the more that it justifies censoring those that are non-consensus views. It's because it leads to a positive feedback loop. As soon as you have one side with 51%, well, you have a micro consensus. It's a little bit more, and so it gives you some small justification to start censoring the other side. Well, then that just makes the consensus side a little bit stronger by virtue of that censorship, which brings it to 60%, and that gives you more justification for censoring the non-consensus side, and so forth. This just adds and feeds and creates a positive feedback loop where any slight modulations away from 50% create more and more consensus in a snowball for the consensus side. Right? It doesn't mean it's consensus. It just means that by virtue of these kinds of the desire, the tendency for folks to want to censor the non-consensus side, well, the side that's even nano consensus will just snowball eventually, have a tendency to snowball towards complete consensus over time. It would be much safer, and of course it's still not recommended, to have some human societal tendency to censor the consensus side. So it's like, whenever something is 51%, well, that gives you some reason to just slightly censor it. And if it's 90% that everybody's, well, maybe you should just really push that down so that you actually can hear the other sides. That will tend to push things back towards 50-50, and provide more of an equilibrium. But you still don't want that either, because that's going to mess with the normal, proper, healthy functioning of of these expressive reputation networks by which we find our way to the truth. So next time you hear that there's consensus as if it's a good argument at all, of course it's a bad argument, which I'm not focusing on here. I have a number of discoveries that I'm well known for, and I am well known for them because I overturned the consensus. I didn't believe the consensus, and I said, I don't think that sounds right. The argument, if I just say, well, it seems to be consensus, let's not even worry or work on that, I would have been just walked away and not made any of those discoveries. The consensus is usually wrong for a lot of reasons we've discussed before, but even worse is this notion that the more something seems to be a consensus, the more it justifies censoring and labeling and canceling and suspending those who are not consensus. That obviously leads to positive feedback loop where slightly perceived consensus things just suddenly become more and more consensus for no other reason than the math of positive feedback loops, and not due to anything having to do and not having anything to do with the truth. And that was your Science Moment. If you're enjoying my Science Moments, I think we're in the 190s. We're approaching our 200th fairly soon. These are, again, brought to you by the Free Expression Group, freex.group, and brought to you by VinoOptics, VinoOptics.com, which is our sunwear company, our color blindness company, our vein finder company, the only technology in the world that has these. Give us a look over and support independent research on the foundations of freedom.